Several 100 million years ago, great continental rifts and powerful volcanic eruptions helped to create the Atlantic Ocean. Journey across 10,000 miles of this vast sea on an odyssey of discovery, revealing for the first time some of the mysterious life inhabiting its depths.
Funding for the Atlantic realm is provided by Keebler, helping to make your television enjoyment uncommonly good.
Antarctic ice congeals the Southern Ocean. Yet from this gloom, the light of life will shimmer north through all the broad Atlantic. Again tilted away from the warmth of the sun, the Antarctic will enlarge its kingdom of ice fivefold, as it probably has for each of 25 million winters. Intense cold now tames this wildest of seas. It's as though all life has been drained from this frozen face of the ocean. But ice need be no enemy to life. For Weddell seals, it's a natural roof insulation. Above, it's 40 below in that other atmosphere that seals are obliged to visit briefly for breath. Should they damage their strong teeth, which they use to keep the holes open, then the ice would become an impenetrable shroud rather than a protective blanket. It does happen, but not frequently enough to have deterred them from becoming the most southerly dwelling mammal in the world. Weddell seals evolved in the South Atlantic, moving towards Antarctica as this younger southern ocean opened. This frozen attic is not only home to seals, but vital for the life of the whole Atlantic Ocean, south and north. Because when ice forms, very little salt is crystallized with it, the water becomes very saline, colder and dense, and sinks. And so begins a long, slow, and important journey north along the floor of the ocean. Millions of tiny shrimp graze on microscopic algae that the ice entombs as it forms. Fish larvae haunt the translucent window that allows the pale light of midwinter to filter through to these waters, where the slow but steady pulse of life ticks on through the cold months. An assortment of comb jellies constantly strive against the downward drift of the cold, salty current. They fish for the darting shapes of copepods in these sub-zero waters. A sea butterfly, a relative of the snail, climbs through the salty water that is sinking to the bed of this shallow sea. Showered by endless free meals from above, the unfussy sea louse grows to giant size in this super-cooled current and lives long as well. In appearance, some of its relatives seem to have crawled from the pages of prehistory to terrorize the shrimp of today. Until it moves, a plunderfish is not easy to see. She's laid her small cluster of yolky eggs and won't leave such caviar unguarded for long. In polar seas, many sea spiders grow as big as your hand, feeding on anemones. And this is no ordinary fish. Here, where it's so cold that ice can form on the sea floor, a lesser fish would be frozen alive. But the ice fish is equipped with a personal antifreeze in its clear blood. In crevices where ice doesn't form, a tangle of sea life persistently blossoms. And yet, inches away from these fan worms, anemones, and sea stars, winter ice is shaving the rocks bare. Sea slugs at times roam over sponges that, protected here, may be several hundred years old. This crevice life emerges again when the season turns and the grip of the ice on these shallows is released. The translucent roof of this world flushes green as millions of tiny diatoms still caught in the ice are suffused by the stronger light and multiply in their fragmenting prison. The ocean begins to break its bonds, and the pulse of life quickens. Weddell seals can again breathe where they please. The rocks, scoured by ice, will soon be reclothed in green. On the diatoms released by the melt, tiny shrimp called krill break their winter fast, but only to fatten and themselves fall prey to petrels, dainty birds that skate the oceans of the world in unseen millions. But krill live only in polar waters. They are staple food, the rice of the sea for many South Atlantic animals, from giant whales to eager penguins. They are gathering now in anticipation of this New Year feast of spring. Leopard seals laze on what ice is still held fast to the land. Unlike the Weddell seals, they are sleek, speedy predators and will pursue the penguins under the ice floes as the winds and waves reopen this ocean. An albatross catches the winds of this now larger summer ocean. But the vanished ice has done its job, for deep below, running north, is that slow, life-giving sunken current of dense cold water formed when the sea froze. Above it, heat and water are distributed in currents and winds that became established as first the North and then the South Atlantic became one great ocean realm. Once the space between the drifting continents had passed a critical width, the water masses became organized into great circling currents or gyres. The immense gyrations of these warm or cool rivers in the sea, one in the South Atlantic, another in the North, can move exceedingly slowly. They flow at different depths, passing over or under each other, sometimes mingling, sometimes not. Similar gyrations take place in the air above. The movements of layered air currents traced by clouds high and low are often more clearly visible than the mysterious movements of the ocean's depths. By the wind sailors were using the currents and winds of the North Atlantic long before our explorers and traders had even evolved. A flotilla of these jellyfish, each a single animal, sails not into the wind, but downwind and at an angle, much as any sailing vessel on a broad reach. Tacking like this may deflect them from flotsam piled up ahead by the wind. Each sturdy sail, being slightly curved, can catch any Atlantic breeze or gale. Velella, that's its proper name, is one of the few creatures that live astride the two worlds of air and ocean. Portuguese man-o-war, notorious to us for its powerful stings, is also an ocean creature that has reached up into the wind to use that energy for movement across the current. It's actually a colony of animals, but with one large gas-filled float that also functions as a sail. And because its float is living tissue, it must be dipped in the waves to keep its surface moist. To live adrift in the wide blue Atlantic may not be as idyllic as it sounds, for blue water is poor water, an ocean desert. But like a desert on land, it's not devoid of life. What does live here must hunt for food, but must also hide in this open sea. Venus's girdle swims transparent as the water, a challenge to any eye. Phantoms of the Atlantic, voracious comb jellies, some as big as a hat, play hide and seek in this ocean of light. Some of these fragile hunters are colonies of individuals strung together, their flexibility and invisibility vital to their survival in the push, pull, and swing of the current. Twice the length of a man, this aggregation of individual animals is one of the salps. They're usually found only in these warm waters, and amazingly can filter enough particles from this barren sea to survive. An even greater wonder is that in this sunlit void there swim the greatest grazers of ocean pastures. Down from the north have come humpback whales, but to a strange rendezvous where there's nothing for them to eat. A female maneuvers, protective of her young calf, born perhaps a few days ago. And that's why she came here, to seek the warm protection of this empty sea and to give birth. She has no need for food and doesn't try to feed. This has been maternity leave only. Now, deliberately, the pod of humpbacks turns for home. Not aimless wanderers in inner space, but confident travelers, sure in their navigation, and to us, mysteriously certain of reaching the rich feeding grounds of much cooler Arctic waters. This bewildering expanse of underocean highways in which our several warm-blooded cousins so purposefully travel is to us largely closed without the most sophisticated submarines and electronic eyes and ears. And yet, on the great carousel of currents, turtles are whirled through the ocean and somehow know exactly where to get off and land back on the island on which they were born. A baby turtle embarks instinctively on its voyage. At first, a vulnerable wanderer adrift in the undersea breeze. One day, its extraordinary senses will bring it home again, but only if it survives this hungry, no-hiding-place ocean. A manta ray sweeps through this blue universe, cruising through a space that's little known to us, although so very close to home. The remora fish clinging to its back ride with no other ray, but just why they stay close and exactly what they feed on is still a mystery of the sea. The manta is a gentle giant and only feeds on the fine plankton of the sea. But by day the water is clear and the manta merely glides along the steep edges of the coral reefs, waiting. is at night that the manta's weight is rewarded by a wealth of microscopic plankton rising from deeper water on a nightly migration. They are met by the manta's capacious mouth. Manta-like, but several thousand times smaller, a winged snail or pteropod has swum slowly up from greater depths. They're often called sea butterflies, but the flattened lobe of the body that resembles a wing helps to catch particles of food and channel them to its mouth. Here's another. Like an angelic slug, it's a rather more vigorous swimmer migrating up from the depths. Contractions of the bell of this jellyfish send it swooping through the clouds of plankton, soon to be harpooned by the stinging cells on the tentacles. And here's another version of comb jelly, a scintillating hunter. Able to emit its own living light, those rippling flashes are reflections of other light scattered by the fine structure of the beating combs of hairs. This aquabatic shrimp is quite an extraordinary predator. It chases food rather than floating and fishing as comb jellies do. Its legs are an unusual design for a shrimp, and it's also rare to see the animal swimming freely as it is here. It usually travels in its own inner spaceship, a tough, gelatinous envelope that is second-hand, having once belonged to a salp. The shrimp's name is Phronema, and this one is at home in the floating barrel that it has commandeered after killing the owner and eating the living contents. The hijacker is always a female, and in time will keep her eggs in this mobile home. Her short legs are ideal for beating a current of water through the vessel to keep this cabin-cum-nursery well aerated. She's quite transparent and can't hide the opaque remains of a meal outlined in her stomach. She has very efficient eyes, the two faceted bulges that appear to be close to the stomach. They can see both up and ahead and detect the luminescence of the living salp whose house this once was. Using the jet of water propelled by the legs, this little inner space capsule is highly maneuverable. This capsule is laden with both parent and offspring. It's also an edible house. The larvae graze on the inside of the barrel. When the larvae embark on their inner spacewalk, they'll need the same visual acuity as mother to hijack another glowing salp. Though most of these little predators may be lost as prey to other larger predators that lie in wait in the deep ocean darkness. The secrets of this flimsy, transparent world don't readily reveal themselves. Such invisible jellies are not easily caught or observed. New predators, when found, seem to step from the realms of fantasy. This multi-mouthed colony is a type of siphonophore, fishing with tiny tentacles. Such consumers are important links in a fragile chain of ocean life that has hardly been unraveled. tricks of the light can be useful to both hunter and the hunted. The houndfish spent its early years safe in the mangroves of oceanic islands. Out here, there's nowhere to hide, but its darker reflection in the surface can confuse a predator, and its near invisibility fool its prey. Tarpon are also fish of shallow lagoons when young, but once they're full grown into the sleek, voracious predators of the ocean that sportsmen have come to prize, they must move to deeper water, clearer and well aerated. That great mouth will engulf many a victim from below. At some angles, a solitary tarpon can move almost unseen as the large mirror of its scales reflects the ocean. Chase of the sea, evolution is pitting design against design. Inevitably, as strategy meets counter-strategy, the boundary between ocean and air is breached. With its dark back and light belly, the flying fish is designed to hide from two worlds. When threatened, it can slip through the curtain of waves to glide momentarily on the Atlantic winds, perhaps for long enough to outwit the pursuer. Scarcely visible, they haunt the surface in hunting schools. At this angle, even a marauding pack of dolphin fish may not see them. But once silhouetted in these clear waters, the game will be up and the chase begin. But the flying fish will have that special sporting chance. It's sport, as well as commerce, exploration, war, and scientific curiosity that brings us out to sea. In the armory of any fisherman are weapons designed to confuse, deceive, and lure. A comical squid will call from the sea a powerful ocean hunter, a giant of a fish, built to roam this blue desert, a king among predators. The predator in us desires to overthrow this monarch. Already lured, but as yet unhooked, the marlin streaks in pursuit. It's invisible to its opponent and as fast as any of their craft. Becomes a victim of its champion prowess, of its own natural skills at pursuing and spearing prey. It has little to fear save sharks and people. Perhaps for the first time in its life, it feels this alien restraint from an unknown world. The deposed monarch is now ungraciously exiled from its realm. The arrival of the marlin from the fishing competition is a highlight of the Puerto Rican carnival in San Juan. Even the stillness of death can't mask the fact that this is among the fastest of fish. In life, those fins can tuck into slots in the body, a streamlining technique which only now we use on high-speed aircraft. From the point of its spear or bill to its slim, sickle-shaped tail, it's an animal built for speed. Here, it's a trophy. Only its length and weight matter to the pride of the contestants. Although some are sold for food in local markets, most of those caught are tagged and released. But these few will not have died in vain. The man from the Billfish Foundation is here. His organization, which includes fishing interests, is concerned for the future of the marlin and its billfish relatives. They want to know what they feed on, where they're caught, how long they live. These magnificent fish are predators in need of protection. The Atlantic would be a desert indeed without them. Better that more and more be released to find their way back into the rivers of the sea. Of all the hidden waterways that course through the North Atlantic, perhaps the best known is the Gulf Stream. Within its embrace drift creatures swept north from the Caribbean and the Gulf of Florida. It's like a warm wind billowing through the Atlantic. It's one of the greatest rivers in the world. This strange river does have confining banks. Though tenuous, this southern border is quite clear for sailor, sportsman, and marlin to see. A drift line of fragmented weed, perhaps the flotsam of some distant storm, marks its edge. To this well-signposted rendezvous come the marlin, dolphin fish, and others that know that in the shade of these floating parasols, there hides a multitude of other fish on which to feed. Here is a nursery for fish in mid-ocean. This sea is ever pregnant with floating seeds, larvae, and eggs. And very quickly, the jetsam of Atlantic ships becomes just another fortunate footing for a blossoming of barnacles. These young Gulf butterfish, hatched from eggs caught in the weed, may not grow much larger and will keep to this sanctuary. But a young tuna is just a tiny, ghostly replica of the giant that will hunt in the open ocean. In 1492, Columbus encountered the odd seaweed of the Sargasso. Tales were told of this strange stretch of ocean where a ship could be trapped forever in the matted tresses of Neptune's hair. The drifting tangle of the Sargassum on the edge of the stream is much like an oceanic island, in that young fish find shelter here before heading into the sea. But this is also a moving home for hitchhikers, providing snacks and a salad on the conveyor belt of the Gulf Stream's current. And some 50 kinds of fish come here to nibble its fronds, find temporary cover in its shade, or hunt each other. This triggerfish can picnic precisely on whatever lives on the weed. As it drifts north, the weed may pick up or lose its vagrant hitchhikers. So the Gulf Stream maps out its own progress into the Atlantic with this living line, its geography known to the ocean predators that exploit it. But how did the Gulf Stream itself originate? How was the great circulating gyre of the North Atlantic set in motion as the ocean grew in size? Only when the North Atlantic exceeded a critical width could its great gyre begin to cycle, and the narrow jet of the Gulf Stream become established. The warm red stream spins off circular eddies rich in nutrients into the Sargasso, seen here in green. Oceanographers have come to regard the notorious weed of the Sargasso as quite an extraordinary plant. Using the Gulf Stream and Sargasso as a giant test tube, scientific light is being shed on how the weed sustains itself. Culturing weed fragments at sea shows the weed to be an ocean adventurer, not just surviving, but actively growing, feeding on those nutrients carried by the Gulf Stream, injected into the Sargasso or carried beyond around the North Atlantic. It's clear that Sargassum weed and its many dependent creatures is the unique result of a plant evolving with the North Atlantic, adapting to the currents that were born as the ocean itself grew. Giving up its secrets as its progress is plotted around the gyre, its weedy tresses, tailored to a life in this swirling sea, are not tatters from some distant shore or torn from some sunken seaweed reef as Columbus speculated. The weed is the closest thing to a tree in the ocean. Sargassum is sometimes called sea holly because of its serrated fronds. It's buoyed up by tiny bladders looking like grapes, keeping the weed close to the surface, one secret of its evolutionary success. The sprigs of tiny colonies of animals called hydroids find a footing, and the tentacles of anemones fuzz the weed. It's as though this was the canopy of a forest, festooned with hungry creatures that usually live closer to the ground. But for the barnacles that settle here, and the shrimp that clamber about well camouflaged, the ground is a sea floor 15,000 feet far below. Some crabs here have limbs flattened for swimming. They have taken to this mobile world and find a suitable cabin space in the lower deck. This female is in berry. The larvae that hatch from her eggs will swim free for a time, and the fortunate few that avoid drifting away will settle among other fronds of weed. Camouflage can be almost perfect. The white blotches resemble the white chalky tubes of tiny worms on the surface of the weed. A crab overboard can suffer disaster. Somehow it must swim up. Hunters can come out of the blue, and that's also true at the surface. Even in this underworld, triggerfish are quick to pull down the unwary. Safety in the sargassum, as for any sailor, lies in clinging tight to the wreckage. The triggerfish are very agile, and they graze the weed with precision, their fins holding them stationary in the water. They may only take up a territory for a short time, hiding in the fronds. But the almost invisible sargassum pipefish is a permanent weed rider. Although it's a male, it has the task of brooding eggs within its body. So the young will also stay close to the weed, unlike the freely spawning crabs and triggerfish. There is strong competition for space here, and this pipefish is seen off by a young trigger. What might look like a mere tangle of weed has, for each fish in its shadow, already defined limits of ownership. This porcupine fish is a victim of a boundary dispute with another. The middle of its tail has been pruned, but it still looks lively enough to fight another day. For much of the time, a porcupine fish blends with its home. But there's another fish, here, which defies detection. Its hand-like fins seem part of the weed itself. The whole animal has grown so like sargassum, it's hard to believe it's a fish at all. And that's the frogfish's plan: ambush. It can gulp a triggerfish, a shrimp, or the crab it's spotted now, almost faster than the eye can see. You'll miss it if you blink. There. The sargassum frogfish is found nowhere else. It is naturally tailored to suit this world. There's a matching sea slug here as well, inconspicuously browsing the tiny creatures that coat the weed. From the anchored ribbons of eggs, its offspring will scatter within this floating forest. When fully grown, some of them may fly like birds among this canopy. The sea slugs and the frogfish are unique to the Sargasso Sea. They are born of this forest, just as the weed itself is a child of the North Atlantic. It grew up with this ocean, circling in its great current, able to survive on what little sustenance was washed from the American continent, or cast off by the Gulf Stream into this strangely isolated sea. As though one living body, the ocean and the air above are energized by the heat coursing in the veins of the Atlantic. The light of the sun warmed these northward flowing currents, and their journey will spread that heat to the polar seas. But as it travels, it stirs the air into a convulsion of storms. This powerful engine of weather mixes the waters and drives the life in the sea. The greatest pasture on the planet blooms with a drift of minuscule life that will feed the gargantuan appetites of this ocean. The basking shark thrives only on these scarcely visible grass roots of the ocean. A shy and harmless giant, its kind are even older than the Atlantic itself. From the water flooding through the gape of its gills, it sifts the first fruits of the sunlight and the sea. Plant and animal plankton form the base of the pyramid of life in the Atlantic, the pyramid of predator and prey that's topped out by our own exploitation of what this ocean has produced. That we must already feed mackerel to some of the fastest, largest, and most traveled of this ocean's wild predatory fish shows just how soon our own insatiable demands can begin to deplete the riches of the sea. A bluefin tuna never sleeps. Its huge body must always move or it would drown. Its blood flows warm. Its hunting range should be through the whole North Atlantic and beyond. Its destiny and nature to circle the ocean rather than the confines of this pen. But the future of the bluefin tuna is perhaps a slow demise as their bodies are prized out of life onto the slabs of gourmet markets in Japan and elsewhere in our world. But the hottest blood that's ever spilt in this ocean is that of whales. Perhaps summoned together by their haunting songs, the humpbacks have come by secret paths from the blue deserts of the tropics to gather and to graze this cold ocean's abundant summer pastures of krill and fish. The whales are descended from creatures that once returned to the ocean, and well within the time in which the North Atlantic formed, they have come to be a part of its mystery, perhaps the most enigmatic of players on its stage. In the theater of the Atlantic, Our part has till now been small, though in places of devastating effect. So are we yet sufficiently wise to accept and perfect a leading role as guardians of its future? Our electronic eyes and ears and remote weather buoys anchored in deep water can monitor the daily movements and state of currents in the ocean and air. They are beginning to reveal the mechanism of the natural weather machine throughout the Atlantic. And yet, in the shadow of this buoy, there are simple mysteries of ocean life not yet fully explained. A school of sprats, sheltering hundreds of miles from the nearest shores where they might have been spawned. Many kinds of eggs are cast into the cradle of the ocean, most to expire or be eaten long before encountering a chance island such as this. Goose barnacles settle as vagrant larvae and cluster here as they did once on sailing ships, to the puzzlement of sailors who believed them to be young barnacle geese that would fly from out the sea. A typical sailor's yarn, it was a simple case of misidentity and excessive imagination. They are now a mystery explained. The old seafarers were quite used to schools of fish following in the shadows of their ships in the deep ocean. And one solitary hitchhiker among the many kinds they knew and sometimes caught was given the name of wreckfish. But again, there's mystery here. How has this buoy attracted this lone wreckfish out of the vast surrounding ocean? Here it lives, feeding on some of the other vagrants of the sea, which have in their own mysterious way made this island home. For many kinds of fish, the wilderness of the ever-widening Atlantic offered an ever-growing space to explore. In a startling diversity of form and color, their flocks can illuminate this ocean as vividly as birds do the air. Their flight in schools is both efficient and safe. Slipstreaming in each other's wake, they move swiftly and almost as one being. They feed on the wing, on the plankton that clouds the waters of this sunlit sea. A close-knit school is more difficult for a shadowing shark or other predator to find, and the numbers may serve to confuse an attacker, or at least limit the losses to an unfortunate few. We are the only predator that might try to catch and eat them all. From pole to pole, life shimmers through the Atlantic, even to its deepest abyss. This ocean of light is just a bright entrance to inner space, a threshold beyond which in one relatively small step we can sink below Neptune's cloak of darkness. But our return to the sea, where perhaps life began, can only be as alien beings, encapsulated in our own atmosphere, descending from the world above the waves to the deep abyss the realm of perpetual Atlantic night.
Plunge deep into the Atlantic Ocean and observe the mysterious deep-sea creatures that make it their home. Atlantic Realm, next at 8 on Channel 10.
Keebler is proud to have made the preceding program possible. Keebler, helping to make your television enjoyment uncommonly good.